So one huge problem that I've noticed with having published my Enigma syndrome videos is that everybody thinks that their gecko who has a hard time eating is an enigma. And it has been like the bane of my existence because I feel like, one, it's my fault for perhaps not explaining it well enough, or two, it's my fault that maybe people are now just claiming that their gecko has a neurological disorder when it really doesn't. And it's very frustrating for me because the purpose and the message that I want to serve is that I bring awareness to Enigma syndrome and what it is, and the fact that it doesn't even need to exist. Geckos aren't good at hunting, some geckos aren't, that is, and that'll always exist, but that is not what Enigma syndrome is. It just so happens to be a factor of what Enigma syndrome is. This video is all about, does your gecko have Enigma syndrome? And probably not. I would say that like 98% of the people who reach out to me say their gecko has Enigma syndrome, and it's not even an Enigma morph. It's not at all. Either their gecko is just a bad hunter or their gecko is sick, and we'll talk about both of those. So let's go ahead and get started, and if I get a little heated, I apologize. First thing to know if your gecko has Enigma syndrome or not is your gecko an enigma? Like, is it an actual Enigma morph? Now, if you got your gecko from a pet store, probably not. If you got your gecko from a breeder or an expo, then you were likely told the morph of your gecko, so you know. In those situations where people contact me and they say, hi, my gecko is an enigma such and such, then I know their gecko probably has Enigma syndrome because they know the morph. But most of the time people just message me saying, oh, my gecko is an enigma, and it's like a normal morph. It's not an enigma. So I want to reiterate, you will not find enigmas in pet stores. Like, I've never seen an enigma in a pet store ever. I've never seen someone say that they got their gecko from a pet store and it was an enigma. So you have to be very cautious about using that word that you assign to a gecko that came from a pet store, because your gecko could still have a neurological disorder, but it will not be Enigma syndrome if your gecko is not an enigma. Now, if you get your gecko off of Craigslist, then you may have been given the gecko without actually knowing what the morph is. And in these situations, there are some visual keys or visual markers that you're able to figure out this gecko could possibly be an enigma, but you'll never know for sure. Typically when people buy enigmas, they're expensive, and so they're not going to just forget that morph. When they rehome them on Craigslist, typically they will indicate if it's an enigma, or they'll want a lot of money because they spent a lot of money because it's an enigma, and in which case they'll still indicate that it's expensive because it is an enigma. So what are some of the physical characteristics that an enigma might have? Now keep in mind, the look of an enigma varies a lot. So my gecko Edard does not look anything like my gecko Sam and Gilly, but they're both enigmas. They both have the enigma gene. So what are some of the ways you can determine if your gecko has the enigma gene? So a lot of times in enigmas you will see a light colored tail. It is typically white or purple or maybe even just a very pale pink. The key marker of an enigma is like sporadic spotting, and it's not just like regular spotting like a leopard gecko may have. The spots are very small, very frequent, and this can vary between geckos. But when I look at an enigma, because I'm so familiar with them, I can tell if it's an enigma a lot of times based on the spotting it has or the coloring of its body. So some enigmas will have, like I said, the pale colored tail, and they'll also have pale spots on their body, like typically one right in the middle or two, one on like towards the head and one towards the lower part of the body. It'll be like the same color as its tail, so if it has like a whitish or a purple tail, it'll be like a whitish or a purple spot on the body. This can also be found on the head in the shape of a crown. So Sam and Gilly are examples of this, where they have that like pale colored crown on their head. It just kind of bends towards where their ears are. And also, enigmas typically have very particular eyes. Now, I have found this is not the case with all enigmas, because one thing for sure about enigmas is they've been crossed with everything. So you'll get enigmas mixed with tangerine, enigmas mixed with like super snows, enigmas mixed with max snows, enigmas mixed with all kinds of stuff. You'll get enigmas mixed with white and yellow, enigmas mixed with eclipse gene. Now, you can never 100% identify a leopard gecko as an enigma based on what it looks like. Those are just some of the key factors, but again, like, a gecko can look like an enigma and be a different morph, and so there are some morphs that look like enigma, such as white and yellow, White and yellow can produce some similar looks as Enigma, and so can the eclipse gene. The eclipse gene can create very small spotting on the body, as well as obviously it is a eye trait, but that's beside the point. Those two genetic factors, white and yellow and eclipse, can cause your gecko to look like an Enigma and not be Enigma whatsoever. So your gecko is most likely not an Enigma if you were not told it's not an Enigma, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't have some sort of problem. If you for some reason feel like your gecko has Enigma syndrome, it might be because your gecko has another neurological disorder that is like unnamed or unassociated with a morph, or it could have another health problem, or it could just be a really bad hunter. Like, some geckos just aren't great hunters. I'll give you an example of Renly. Renly sometimes is not the best hunter, and it's because her eyes are really, really big. She has some issues with depth perception, so sometimes her ability to catch things or hunt things is hindered by her actual eyesight, which is really terrible, but that's an example. I also have geckos who have neurological disorders that are not Enigmas. I have Tormund, who has a neurological disorder. Marjorie has one, and she's not an Enigma. There's a couple geckos that I have. I feel like I'm forgetting one of them. Oh yes, Jojen. Jojen is a white and yellow. He's not an Enigma, and he has white and yellow syndrome. That's a whole other story. We're not going to get into that right now. But he has white and yellow syndrome, and he has a neurological disorder, and that is called white yellow syndrome. If your gecko simply is a bad hunter, that doesn't mean it has a neurological disorder. Sometimes geckos, like I said, like Renly, are just bad at hunting, but that does not actually mean she has a neurological disorder. There are a number of other symptoms that I indicate in my first episode of my Enigma syndrome series, and I'll list them as follows. So there's head bobbing, head tilting, circling, death rolling, stargazing. All of those symptoms are associated with Enigma syndrome and can be found in other neurological disorders. If those aren't happening, your gecko probably doesn't have a neurological disorder at all. It probably is just a derpy hunter, which is totally normal for leopard geckos. So if you notice that your gecko does have head bobbing or tilting or swaying, or if your gecko does a lot of circling or death rolling, or if your gecko does a lot of stargazing, if your gecko does a lot of those things, it may have a neurological disorder, but you should not label it as Enigma syndrome unless it is an Enigma. If your gecko does have a neurological disorder, there could be a number of factors, including head injury or head trauma. It could be from really bad genetics, or it could be from an incubation problem when it was still in the egg, or it could be from another genetic factor such as white and yellow syndrome, which again is a whole other thing. So please don't say your gecko is white and yellow if you don't know if your gecko is white and yellow. One more thing I want to talk about before I close out this video is that some people will message me and say that their gecko is exhibiting some of the symptoms I mentioned, like, you know, like wobbling or circling or head tilting or stargazing. And then they send me a video of their gecko and it's an ill gecko, like it's sickly. The key to understanding the difference is that a healthy gecko that is full of vitality, that is not underweight, that is being properly supplemented, will still exhibit these symptoms. However, in a sick gecko, those symptoms would go away if the gecko's health was up to par. So I'll use an example. Someone sent me a video of their gecko and it was, you know, not hunting very well, it wasn't moving very well, and what actually was wrong with it is it didn't have the calcium in its bones to properly move. It was also lacking a lot of energy because it wasn't being properly supplemented or wasn't getting enough vitamins, wasn't being fed properly, and this gecko had MBD. So definitely take into consideration the fact that 1, your gecko could just be a bad hunter, 2, your gecko could be unhealthy, before jumping to the conclusion that your gecko has a neurological disorder, and before jumping to the even further conclusion that your gecko has Enigma syndrome. If you're not clear about what the symptoms are, please rewatch the first episode. I will include it at the end of this video, right after I, you know, say my subscribe and stuff like that. So please watch that video. I'll also include links below. Please watch that video. I can't reiterate enough, because the amount of people that come to me saying that their gecko has Enigma syndrome, or you know what, one time someone actually told Emma Lynn Sampson that her gecko had Enigma syndrome just because it was a bad hunter. That's so dangerous. You have to understand when you misdiagnose or mislabel a gecko as having had Enigma syndrome, and I get that this potentially is my fault. Maybe I wasn't clear enough. I feel like I was. Maybe I wasn't. But if you are mislabeling a gecko, you are not helping to fix the problem. You are helping to make it worse. And I don't want to be like I don't want to upset anyone by what I'm saying, but the purpose of spreading information about Enigma syndrome is to help eventually end it. by no longer breeding Enigmas. Unfortunately, if you're just saying every other gecko has Enigma syndrome because it is, you know, a bad hunter, then you're not helping the problem, you're contributing to it. So if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below, or shoot me an email, it's in the links below, or shoot me a message on social media, also in the links below. If you want to know if your gecko is an Enigma, chances are it probably isn't. I will tell you likely yes or no. Again, I can't tell you 100% because I won't know the genetics if you don't, but I can help you determine if there is something actually wrong with your gecko, or maybe your gecko is just not a good hunter. Thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe, hit the notification bell, hit the like, leave a comment, all that good stuff, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!